On the 28th of September, 1066, 3 days after the battle at Stamford Bridge, a fleet of several hundred ships crossed the channel overnight and slid into a flooded lagoon at Pevensey, on the coast of Sussex. Nobody opposed the landing. The English fleet had gone back to London. The coastal levies who had watched this horizon all summer had been released to their farms 3 weeks earlier, when the invasion season was judged to be over. And the King of England was 250 miles away in York, standing over the wreck of the last army that had tried this. Duke William of Normandy came ashore without losing a man, if his own chroniclers are believed, moved east along the coast to Hastings, raised a timber castle, and then began burning Sussex, farm by farm, village by village. The choice of ground was not an accident. Sussex was the Godwin family's home earldom. Every field William's men put to the torch belonged, directly or through his tenants, to King Harold himself. An invader who wanted a long war would have dug in and waited. William wanted the opposite. The burning was a message addressed to one man, and it traveled north faster than any army could march. Come and fight for your own land. Now. The news reached Harold in York around the 1st of October. He had been king for 9 months. In the last 2 weeks of that reign, he had marched the length of England, destroyed a Norwegian invasion, and lost the military strength of the north doing it. The armies of his northern earls had been wrecked at Fulford 5 days before Stamford Bridge, and his own household troops had paid for the victory that followed. Now the second invasion of the autumn was ashore in his family's own earldom, burning his own tenants out of their homes. Harold's objective was the one he had just achieved against the Norwegians: destroy the landing before it could take root. The question was timing, and he had a choice that historians still argue over. He could wait, hold London, call out the full military levy of the southern shires, let William sit on a shrinking patch of burned coast through the autumn. England's system of service, the Fyrd, could in principle raise thousands of men from the shires. They simply were not assembled yet. Or he could strike immediately with what he had, as he had at Stamford Bridge, and end the year's Second War the way he had ended the first. Speed had just worked spectacularly. And every day he waited, the burning went on. Harold chose speed for the second time in 3 weeks. The story every schoolbook tells next is the Great March, Harold's exhausted army pounding 200 miles south from York in little more than a week, gathering men as it went, arriving at the coast worn to the bone. That version has a history of its own, and it is shorter than you might expect. No source from the 11th century actually describes a forced march south. The phrase and the image were built by Victorian historians 8 centuries later, partly on a misreading. The Anglo-Saxon Chronicle records that after the summer watch ended, the ships came home. The Victorians read that as Harold disbanding his navy. In March of 2026, research at the University of East Anglia argued the opposite. The fleet came home to London and stayed operational, and when the king moved south, much of his army likely moved the way English kings usually moved, by water down the coast in ships. The comparison the researchers offered is hard to ignore. Even hardened infantry of the American Civil War, on better roads, managed about 100 miles in 5 days at the outer limit. Whether Harold's men marched every mile on foot or sailed most of them is now a live argument among historians, so both versions belong on the map. What is not in doubt is the result. Within 2 weeks of hearing the news, Harold stood on a ridge in Sussex, 7 miles from William's camp, with an army. William's position deserves the same fair hearing. The Duke of Normandy was, in October 1066, in the most dangerous situation of his career by his own design. Behind him was the autumn channel. If the campaign failed, there was no orderly way home. Around him was a foraging radius that shrank every day his army ate through it. He had shipped war horses, prefabricated timber, and several thousand men on the promise that a quick war would make them rich, and promises like that spoil quickly. His claim was that England had been pledged to him by King Edward years before, and by Harold himself in the oath over relics that part 1 of this story examined. Our fullest account of that claim comes from William of Poitiers, the Duke's own chaplain, writing after the victory to justify it, a lawyer's brief in the shape of a history. The same source says the Pope had sent William a banner blessing the enterprise. No English writer of the time confirms it. Strip the advocacy away, and the military logic underneath is still clear. William could not win a long war. He needed the English king to come to him quickly, angry and under strength, saying, which is exactly what the burning of Sussex was engineered to produce. Two commanders, for opposite reasons, wanted the same thing: one battle as soon as possible. Sure, they met on the 14th of October, on a ridge above a marshy valley 7 miles inland from Hastings, where the road to London crossed the high ground by an old hoar apple tree. Harold took the crest and packed his army into the formation England had fought in for 2 centuries, the shield wall, a standing line of overlapping shields, several men deep, no cavalry, no reserve worth the name. Below him, William drew up in 3 lines, archers in front, armored infantry behind them, and behind those, the thing England had never faced in strength, mounted knights trained to fight from the saddle. How many men stood on that ridge is a question the sources answer badly. Writers of the next generation claimed anywhere from 14,000 to 150,000 on the Norman side alone. Modern historians, working from ship counts and logistics, put each army at roughly 6,000 to 8,000, 2 forces of nearly equal size and nearly matched equipment. And one more thing about that ridge is worth saying plainly: we are not certain it is the right one. The tradition that Battle Abbey's high altar marks the spot where Harold fell comes from the abbey's own chronicle, written a century later. No weapon, no grave pit, no battlefield archaeology has ever been recovered there, or at either of the rival sites historians have proposed. The best-known battle in English history has never yielded a single confirmed relic of itself. The 2 armies were built around 2 different answers to the same problem. The English answer was the housecarl, a professional household soldier paid in silver and land, the closest thing the 11th century Europe had to a standing heavy infantryman. His signature weapon was the 2-handed Dane axe, a blade on a 5-foot haft that the tapestry shows shearing through horse and rider together, the same core that had broken Norway at Stamford Bridge 3 weeks earlier, thinner now by exactly that victory. Around the housecarls stood the fyrd, the shire levy, spear and shield. Everyone fought on foot. The wall was the weapon. A man who left it to chase a fleeing enemy stopped being part of it. The Norman answer was coordination: archers to loosen the line, infantry to fix it in place, and knights, men who had trained from boyhood to fight together on horseback, in small units bound by oath and pay, delivering shock charges with lance and sword, wheeling away and coming again. Man for man, the equipment on both sides was nearly identical, and the surviving pieces in Europe's museums show it. The same conical helmets with nasal bars, the same knee-length mail, kite shields on both sides of the field. The difference was not the kit. It was that one army was a wall and the other was a system of moving parts, and a wall only wins if it never moves. The battle opened at about 9 in the morning and immediately went wrong for William. His archers shot uphill into a wall of shields and achieved almost nothing. His infantry climbed the slope and were beaten back. His knights charged, and for perhaps the first time in living English memory, cavalry broke against infantry and recoiled. On the Norman left, the Breton division buckled and began streaming back down the hill, and the panic spread with a rumor that the Duke himself was dead. This is the moment the tapestry chooses to stitch in detail. William, very much alive, wrenching his helmet back off his face so his men could see him, while his half-brother Odo, a bishop carrying a mace instead of a blade, rides through the wavering line, rallying what the tapestry's caption calls the young men. The army steadied. And on the English right, something had already happened that would decide the afternoon. Part of the wall had come off the ridge, chasing the fleeing Bretons downhill, and had been surrounded on the low ground and destroyed. The wall had held, but it had also for a few minutes moved. What happened next is the most famous tactical maneuver in English history, and it comes to us entirely from the winners. The Norman chroniclers say that twice more that afternoon the knights pretended to flee deliberately on order, and twice more men of the English wall broke ranks to pursue and were turned on in the open and cut down. Part 2 of this story left a question open, and this is where it belongs. At Fulford, 3 weeks earlier, a feigned retreat by the Norwegians is plainly described in a near-contemporary English source. At Hastings, every account of the trick is Norman, and written after the victory, it explains. Some military historians accept it. Norman and Breton cavalry had used the maneuver before in France. Others have called it a legend. The historian John Beeler argued the story was invented to dress up moments of honest panic. And Richard Holmes made the practical soldier's objection that several thousand galloping horses cannot be recalled and turned like a drill team. There is no way to settle it from the sources we have. The retreats may have been a plan, or a route retold as one. What no one disputes is the effect. Each time part of the wall left the ridge, it died on the low ground, and by late afternoon the line on the crest was shorter, thinner, and tiring. No one planned for the battle to last 9 hours. Medieval field battles usually broke in 1 or 2. Hastings ran from 9 in the morning until the light failed, which tells you how close it was, and for how long. Somewhere in that afternoon, the king's brothers died, Gurth and Leofwine, both earls, cut down close enough together that the tapestry gives them a single panel and stitches their names above the bodies. Toward dusk, William changed the geometry. His archers shot high, dropping arrows over the shields instead of into them, while the knights came on again at a line now short enough to flank them. The wall came apart around its king. Harold fell among his household troops where the fighting was thickest. His housecarls, by every account, died where they stood around the body. In the twilight rout that followed, pursuing Norman horsemen piled into a hidden ditch in the dark and died in numbers, an incident first hinted at by William of Poitiers, though the name it carries, the Malfosse, the evil ditch, was coined by a chronicler at Battle Abbey a century later. By nightfall on the 14th of October, England had lost its king, 2 of its earls, and the core of its only professional army, the 3rd army it had lost in 25 days. Ask anyone how Harold died, and you will get the same answer: an arrow in the eye. It is one of the 2 facts about 1066 that everyone carries. Here is what the sources actually hold. The account that may be the earliest of all, a Latin battle poem called the Carmen, possibly written within a year of the fighting, says nothing about an arrow. It says 4 knights, William himself among them, reached Harold and cut him down, and it itemizes the blows. William of Poitiers, the Duke's chaplain, does not say how Harold died at all. The arrow only enters the written record decades later, in Italy of all places, and the story hardens over the following century, increasingly by writers describing a certain embroidered wall hanging. And the hanging itself has been altered. In 1729, the first scholar to publish the tapestry had it drawn panel by panel. In that drawing, the figure beneath the words "Harold the King is killed" grips a spear. When the English antiquarian Charles Stothard engraved the tapestry again 90 years later, the spear had become an arrow in the face. The arrow's feathers match no other arrow stitched anywhere in the tapestry. And beside the figure's eye, conservators have found rows of empty needle holes, the ghost of stitching that was picked out and redone. 9 centuries of certainty may rest on a restorer's guess. The battle did not end the war. It only ended the king. By the tradition of Waltham Abbey, the church Harold had rebuilt, writing its own history a century on, his body was so disfigured that the monks who searched the field could not know him. And they sent for Edith Swanwick, called the Fair, the woman who had been his companion for 20 years before his crown required a political marriage. She identified him, the chronicle says, by marks on his body known only to her. It is a late story told by the house that claimed his grave, and it is the only tender thing in the whole autumn. London did not open its gates. The surviving council chose a new king within weeks, Edgar the Aetheling, great-nephew of old King Edward. the last male of the ancient royal house, a boy in his early teens, proclaimed but never crowned, William did not attack the city. He walked a slow circle of fire around it instead, Romney, Dover, Canterbury, then west along the Thames, burning as he went, until London was a capital wired to a dying countryside. In early December, at Berkhamsted, the leadership of England came out to him. Edgar, the archbishops, the northern earls, they submitted. England was not conquered in a day at Hastings. It was strangled into surrender over 7 weeks, and it never did crown the boy. William was crowned on Christmas Day, 1066, in Westminster Abbey, King Edward's great stone church, consecrated less than a year earlier, the same building stitched into the tapestry's opening scenes. The current abbey on the site was rebuilt centuries later. The church William stood in survives mainly in thread. The rite was performed by Ealdred, Archbishop of York, because the Archbishop of Canterbury, Stigand, held his office under a cloud of church politics that made his blessing worthless to a king who claimed the Pope's favor. The service was conducted in 2 languages for 2 peoples. Ealdred asked the English, in English, if they would have William as king. The Bishop of Coutances asked the Normans in French. Both crowds roared their assent, and the Norman guards posted outside, hearing a sudden roar from inside the church in a language they did not know, concluded the coronation had become an ambush. They did what that army had done all autumn. They set fire to the nearest houses. Smoke rolled into the abbey. The congregation, English and Norman alike, poured out to fight the fires or join the looting. And the chronicler Orderic Vitalis, born in England of a Norman father, records that William, left nearly alone at the altar, was trembling violently as the rite was completed. That is how the Norman Age of England began. A king shaking in an emptied church, his own guard burning the city that had just acclaimed him. The reckoning of 1066 has to be counted twice. William's goal, in his own stated terms, was the crown he insisted he had been promised, and he took it within 3 months of landing in the most complete conquest England has ever undergone. Harold's goal was to keep it against 2 invasions in 1 season, and he destroyed the first and died stopping the second, a king for 9 months and 2 weeks. His entire reign survives in silver, a single coin type, struck at dozens of mints. His crowned profile on one face and one word on the other, pax, peace. It is the only word his kingdom left us, minted between 2 invasions. But the fullest record of that year is not a coin and not a chronicle. It is 70 meters of embroidered linen. And nearly everything about it complicates the phrase, "the winners wrote history." The tapestry was almost certainly made in England by English needleworkers, probably at Canterbury, and the evidence is stitched into it, down to an English letter, the Eth in Earl Gurth's name, that no Norman workshop would have used. The winners commissioned the story, the losers stitched it. Later centuries restitched it, and we have seen what happened to the arrow, and the ending is simply gone. The final panels, which scholars believe showed William's coronation, vanished sometime in the tapestry's 9 centuries. The official story of the conquest breaks off with Englishmen fleeing a lost field. This autumn, for the first time in over 900 years, the tapestry is back in England, on loan to the British Museum. A few days' walk from the field it depicts. The winner's story in the loser's hands. It always was. That is the story of 1066. 3 kings, 3 armies, 1 autumn, and the cloth that has argued about it for 900 years. The next campaign on this channel begins 29 years later with a speech in a French field that set half of Europe marching toward Jerusalem.